Brad, welcome to the show. Thanks for joining us.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Do you just want to start by telling us a little bit about your background and how you came to start Premonition and that sort of early part of the journey?
Yeah, so today my role is leading innovation at Shippit, and that was
Yeah.
as a result of the business purchasing us in 2021, beginning of 2022. And so the Premonition business was founded to try and optimize logistics. It's an AI-powered system that helps each courier company, and there's hundreds of them across Australia, decide what the most efficient way to allocate the deliveries they need to do to each driver, and then each driver to distribute that as efficiently as possible. So it's an exciting product. It pulls tons of carbon out of the air, but it's not actually the problem we started with. The two co-founders of mine, Matthew and Kenneth, and myself actually started in a previous venture looking to do a very similar thing, but in the food banking sector. We saw this problem. We were fresh. We were barely, well, I wasn't even a university graduate at the time, but we saw this problem in global food banking where food banks were being offered more than enough food to meet all the demand in their community, but they weren't able to meet all the demand in their community. And the fundamental issue was logistics. There was an inability for these community organizations to coordinate the hundreds or thousands of volunteers which would have been required in order to transport all the donated food quickly enough to community organizations to turn that into meals. And so we were computer scientists, and we thought, well, computers will probably fix this, and the industry must already have, the commercial logistics industry must have already solved this. So we'll just go find out what they're using. We'll implement it for Food Bank. It'll be a 6-month project, and then we'll start our careers. And pretty quickly, we realized that no, the commercial logistics industry does not have magical AI that can solve all the problems that come with on-demand logistics. And we looked at each other and we thought, all right, well, this isn't going to work. The food banking not-for-profit venture is not going to work. Why don't we try build a commercial logistics business? And that's where Premonition came from. Premonition was actually founded as a social enterprise. So we still provide our software at no cost to not-for-profits that are supporting the community through logistics. But yeah, we fundamentally saw the kind of opportunity to create efficiency, to reduce carbon, and to support drivers in the community with the Premonition software.
So, Brad, just digressing early on the piece, I guess, but how big is that logistics problem then? If, I would have looked at that from an outsider's perspective and thought, yeah, there would be tech for that to solve that. I wouldn't have realized all the food was there to be dealt with if you had the right infrastructure technologically based. How big is that problem then? That if you're as a data science scientist looking at it, thinking it's probably able to be solved easily, what did you learn?
I think from a computational problem, it's complicated. It's relatively simple. The multi-vehicle routing problem, like it's well understood. Right. But logistics is an immensely complex field. You're talking about coordinating the behavior between thousands and thousands of individuals every day. I mean, just to give you a sense of the scale, logistics is about, I think it's 20 to 30% of all man-made emissions. And when we look at that, the vast majority, the biggest single slice is in the last mile, which is really where we play the first and last mile. When we successfully deploy route optimization, we see about a 20% decrease in the number of kilometers on the road, the amount of time drivers are spending out on the road, and as a direct result, the amount of fuel being burnt. That's really the scale of the problem. Is you've got this industry that is a significant contributor to global emissions, and our software is able to go into existing fleets and reduce their emissions by 20%, not by electrifying it, but just by changing behavior, which is exciting, but I think it also gives a sense of the scale.
And when you look at the business, you're acquired by Shippit in 2021-22 for about 20 odd million. What was the primary motivator there? Was it when you looked at the problem and saw that you'd be better off accelerating the cause by teaming up with others, or were there other factors involved?
Yeah, well, look, I think you've probably given the core answer there. Fundamentally, we looked at how we grow as an Australian logistics tech business. And we certainly spent some time looking at the different paths and experimented with, could we grow in Europe, or what does vertical product development look like? And what we landed on is, well, the best path forward was to be part of an organization that already had the footprint that our software could accelerate through, and also have the team and the structure and everything we knew we were going to need to build next in order to scale. And so it was a really natural fit, especially with the Shippit guys. I'd known Will for a long time. I now know Rob very well. I think you had Will on the...
Yeah, we did have Will on the show probably a few months ago now, but it was a fantastic discussion and a great episode.
Yeah, I'll bet. And so, I was talking to Will about solving a specific problem they were looking to solve, and it just became so clear, I think, to at least me, but I think both of us in that call, that actually putting the two businesses together made a whole lot of sense. The things that we would be able to achieve in really what is a joint mission. I mean, Shippit's mission is to be delivering 200 million parcels annually without waste. And that's a big emphasis within the business. The opportunity for them to accelerate that mission with the Premonition tech, and for Premonition to accelerate its mission through the wide market reach of Shippit, was a really, really natural fit.
And from your perspective, were you always entrepreneurial when you sort of started that Premonition business, or before that Food Bank business? Was it entrepreneurial, or was it other areas that drove that, Sarah?
Yeah, I can't really remember a time where I wasn't what I'd now call entrepreneurial. Like when I was a kid, I remember every time I went to my grandmother's place with my cousin, we'd sit out the front and run a shop. And that was our favorite thing to do on the weekend. Through primary school, I used to run a car wash with some friends next to the local sporting field. We had a assignment in high school in our commerce class where we all had to run a business. And I was a bit nervous about how much of the audience that some of the other businesses were going to take on the day. And so our little group acquired everyone else and put a conglomerate together. So I've always really enjoyed that. I don't know really where it comes from, but I've always found it fun. And really, I've found the exercise of bringing people together to do something. I mean, a car wash isn't huge, but it was huge for us at the time. And figuring out how you make it happen and dealing with all the challenges, I've always found that really rewarding.
Yeah. I mean, there's something about the camaraderie that goes with any team, right? Regardless of whether it's sport or business or whatever it may be. There's something about that team and that camaraderie and community that you get from that's fulfilling, especially when you start to see the ways that you can impact it yourself.
Yeah, I agree with that. The most valuable part of the experience of the last 10 years, because that's really the journey my co-founders and our key kind of people have been together working in the space. That's how long we've been working. And I couldn't imagine a group of people I could be closer with. There's something that 10 years of solving problems and having disagreements and coming to resolution and all the tough stuff that happens, is something in it that brings you very close together. And so I wouldn't trade that for the world. That's been a real gift.
What was the biggest thing you learned over that time period, from when you sort of started, probably relatively green when you first started the business, but to look at now, what was the biggest thing that you learned along the way?
Yeah, we were really green. As I said, not even completely out of university. One of the things we definitely learned is that there's a world of really kind strangers out there who are willing to spend a lot of time and go a long way to just help other people. And I certainly benefited from that immensely as a young founder. I also think I was a young founder with a fairly strong vision. And it took me a while to understand how to really share the development of a vision. Nicholas, one of the guys who was instrumental in the business coming together, one of the real partners of the business, he talked a lot about finding 11 out of 10s. You might be 8 out of 10 at something, but if you're not 11 out of 10, you're not the person who should own that part of the business. And there was a lot I had to learn about handing reins, not just of operational execution pieces, but actually in setting the course for the business and handing ownership to a wider team. And it took me a little while to learn that, but I have to say, that was also one of the things I'm grateful for learning through the journey.
In terms of working out what your strengths are and going towards those, and then finding other people who've got the strengths in the fields that you need them in, that's what you're talking about, really?
Yeah, it's absolutely that. And then it's also finding the right way to empower that person to be fully committed and to bring their full talents into whatever problem you're trying to solve. It's one thing to have a really smart person on the team who theoretically could crack the problem you're trying to solve. It's a whole other thing to put them in a place where they're motivated, they have autonomy, they're excited about solving the tough problems that you're staring into. And that's something that I think we achieved with Premonition, but it certainly took some learning to get there.
When was the first time you sort of realized that you'd worked that part of it out? Someone in the business that you can see had that sort of 11 out of 10 that you talk about ability in a certain field, and the time when you've delegated that responsibility to them, and then how you, the second part of that puzzle, how you then got out of their way and let them have that autonomy.
Yeah, that's just a phenomenal question. When you sell a business, there's a lot of moments like that compressed into a very short period of time, and you've got to really trust your team. But look, one thing that really stands out to me is I had a co-CEO, a gentleman named TNT Mack, and he was previously the Chief Technology Officer of Australia Post. He'd had a phenomenal career. He was just a mentor to me before he stepped into the role. And we had to sit down and say, oh, here's the part of the business that I'll look after. Here's the part of the business that you'll look after. And there was something around the commercial side that I still wanted to own. And he turned to me and said, well, Brad, that's not exciting for me if I don't have that as part of my role. And I had to really sit back and think, well, it's exciting. Like, I think I'm best placed to do that. I should do that. He said, you've got to trust me. And we saw a night and day change in terms of how we worked with our customers. With him taking the reins, he did so much with that part of the business that I had never even imagined you could do. And it was difficult to let go of something that I had previously valued a lot, but just maybe wasn't an 11 out of 10 at. And then over time, sitting back and saying, oh, wow, not only have I learned something, but this business has materially grown and benefited from giving the reins up and letting him run with it.
That's fascinating. At the time, obviously that was difficult to come to that realization, and you're obviously glad that you did. But did you feel like you were an 11 out of 10 at the time? Obviously, you realized afterwards when you saw what he did that maybe that wasn't where you were with that. But that at the time, was your perception that you were the best person for that?
Yeah, so I really put a very high level of importance on values and core motivation. When we looked at taking care of customers in a particular way, it was intrinsic to my values that a good job be done there, and I was very motivated to do it. And I guess in my head, I equated that with being an 11 out of 10. And I think at some level, I believe I was just the most passionate about this. But no, I wasn't actually. The career professional who'd dedicated decades of learning that craft because he was also passionate about it was able to absolutely nail it. And so I guess trying to separate what I really cared about from what I was an 11 out of 10 at, and becoming more conscious of that.
It's a great insight. It's a valuable insight too, because, and not many people would go down that path to be able to distinguish between what you're most passionate about versus what you're necessarily the best at. And especially when someone like that comes along and you've given them the reins and they've done the job, it doesn't necessarily always turn out that way too, right? But when you've seen that, I assume makes you more open to doing that type of thing in the future than what you might have otherwise been.
Well, it's completely perspective changing. And it wasn't just that moment. There were a few that kind of worked up to that through the journey, because I think we've got a team of 11 out of 10s at the things they do. But certainly each moment like that reinforces there's a need for a leader to be able to take those risks and understand that just because something didn't work out doesn't mean that wasn't the right decision or the right person to have in the role.
Yeah. And until someone has a go, you're not going to know for sure, right? So sometimes, like you say, it's about taking that risk, seeing what happens. It's a calculated risk by the same token. It's not just away you go. But no, that's fascinating. And in terms of your leadership strengths, what's your biggest strength, would you say?
Look, I'm contributing best when I'm working on articulating the vision for a business, synthesizing what's coming to me from a bunch of 11 out of 10s and playing it back, and building values-based teams. And when I was studying computer science back at UNSW, there's no moment where I was sitting in a lecture thinking, well, my strength is going to be building values-based high-performing teams. But it's the thing I've fallen in love with, because it's the thing that gives me the most joy in running a business, seeing kind of great people come together, feel like they've got a home, feel like they're valued, be valued, and see them achieve great things. That is the most rewarding part of the journey, and I didn't expect that at all.
And what was the most difficult thing about learning to actually articulate that vision? One thing to have the vision in your head, but being able to take that and articulate it to people, was that something that came naturally to you, or was that a bit of a trial and error type?
Talking about what a future could look like and building motivation and momentum behind it, that did come naturally. Codifying that and making it accessible to a whole team and working through the rough edges that every vision has and trying to, catch the cloud and pin it down and share it at an all hands. I didn't know how to do that when we started, and I had to learn. And I was very lucky. I had some fantastic mentors and advisors that kind of stepped me through different approaches, and I found one that works for me. And I think the key there is when you share a vision, you understand that once it's written down for the first time, it's now a document or a vision that belongs to the whole team, and creating an environment where everybody feels like they can equally contribute to an edit or an update or a change or a better articulation of something. That's absolutely critical in having a strong vision as a business.
So this is not your vision as the leader. This is the vision of the business that you are interpreting from everything that you're seeing from everybody and relaying that back in some way. Is that basically how you're perceiving it?
That is how I see it. But I do see it as the role of a leader to articulate a clear vision, partly because that's empowering. Once you've written out your values, your principles, your vision, your mission, all of that, and if you've done it well, and I think that a lot of it, a lot of kind of mission statements or values are kind of done as lip service to sit on a wall. But if it's done well and the whole team are engaged and you see week after week, month after month, people making edits to it because they're referring to it, what you've done then is built a collective vision within the business. And now you've freed everybody to go execute on it without having to come to you every time a decision needs to be made. And so that's a really powerful thing when you get it right.
And when you said you learned how to do that in a way that works for you, can you share with us an example or how that sort of works for you? Because everyone's got in their mind, like you say, a lot of that stuff with regards to vision and some of those things can be just something that's put on a wall that everyone goes through the process. But from what you're saying, it's something that's actually deeply important to you and to the business that you lead, right? Best articulates the way you go through that process.
So I think fundamentally, two things are important. One is you need to challenge yourself to come up with an initial draft that is compelling. And that takes a lot of time, and certainly not the kind of time you'd expect an early stage founder to have. Breaking out space for deep thinking and teasing out and challenging your own thought processes to come up with a first draft is really important. From there, though, the next step is actually to go right through the business. And in a small business, I'm talking every single person and sitting down with them and talking through how you see the future going, what you think is important, and asking for their feedback and having that one-on-one discussion. And it's not a discussion for them to say, yes, that sounds good. It's, well, what would you add to it? What would you change? What do you think is most important out of what's written here? And collating all of that and playing it back to the business. And as long as it's done in a way where you haven't turned up and said, oh, guys, I've got no idea. Any thoughts on where we should go? But it also isn't done on a, look, I've written this. There's a 300-page document.
Jump on board.
Exactly right. Would you please sign here? Yeah, you find the balance between those two. And that works for me. And I found that to be effective.
Yeah, okay. That's interesting. What about in terms of things you're not so good at? What, as a leader, what were some of those types of examples as you went along, and how did you overcome them?
Yeah. Creating a startup, it's like walking around with a mirror up to your face 24 hours a day for years. There is nowhere to run. If there's something you're not doing well, it will become apparent to everyone very quickly. So there's a lot of lessons. One that stands out for me, I think it took me a while to understand how important protecting culture was, and protecting culture from brilliant people who didn't fit in that culture. We worked with some real geniuses, like really brilliant people. And I used to get quite a bit of angst because I'd see how capable this individual was, and there was so much potential and so much they had achieved, and with the right light, with the moons aligning, they added so much. But there was something about the way they were operating or the environment they needed to be successful, which wasn't right for us. And I spent way too long trying to figure out what could be done to fit this person into our culture, or fit our culture to this person, when in reality, there needs to be an acknowledgement that some people just don't fit in this place, and trying to make them fit in this place is bringing everyone else down. There's moments I regret where I think some people got hurt that should not have been, because that behavior or mismatch of culture was really, really sharp towards them. So I hold that as a leader. I regret that. Continuing to learn, but I've certainly got a different view on that now.
I know exactly where you're coming from on that. I think it's one of those things where sort of like almost as much as Steve Jobs, for example, created multiple generations of entrepreneurs and business people, he also created a whole bunch of brilliant arseholes who really are brilliant, but also not necessarily the best people to have in your workplace. And that might be different to your example, but you do see a lot of that type of thing where it's the best thing you can do for your business is to move on from that person or whatever it might be. And I look at Steve Jobs as a classic example. He ran the business, obviously, and was the founder, but so many people aspire to be like him in many industries, including his very blunt and brutal honesty, which can just be being a bit of a pig sometimes, And when that's such an aspirational figure, it's hard for people who are trying to find their place in the world to distinguish between what is just ambition versus not being so nice to get along with.
I think there's plenty of examples in the latest group of visionaries that would fit that description. But also, I mean, I've been lucky in this role in that it did enable me to get a lot of perspective through many different customers who I would go spend months with in their offices and in their culture, and particularly internationally. I did work everywhere from the Middle East to outskirts of Adelaide. The thing that I guess I learned through all of that is, the person who's an asshole here is absolutely perfect somewhere else. And I think that was a missing piece for me as well. Someone who was coming to work for us and by all accounts, putting their heart into trying to bring their capabilities and their way of viewing the world into our business. I'd never want to say, hey, you're an asshole and you shouldn't be here. But there is an acknowledgement that there's a place where you will be accepted and incredibly successful. But here it's damaging. And just acknowledging and accepting those differences of culture and the way people operate, I think, is important in recognizing the reality of those tricky moments.
Very diplomatically put, Brad.
Thank you, Dion.
What about the best advice you were ever given? Like you say, you started off pretty green. Was there someone that gave you advice along the way that was particularly profound, even if it was really simple?
So I got some advice from T, who eventually became my co-CEO. This was when he was advising me and said, look, the most important problems very rarely have solutions. He had got that from this book. He gave me a book afterwards called The Unfinished Leader. And it really speaks to the natural paradoxes that you exist when you're creating a business. You want to be customer centric, but you want to have maximum scale and velocity. These are actually paradoxical ideas, even though you might think, oh, well, if you're just customer centric, you're going to scale. I can tell you building a business facing SaaS business, actually, if you really focus on the customers you have, totally, you will never grow. And the inverse is true as well. If you just totally focus on velocity of new customers and incremental revenue, you eventually hit a point where you haven't done enough to create value for your customers and your business fails. And so you sit in a paradox and there is no answer. And anyone who comes up and says 100% if we just do X, we'll succeed, unfortunately, they're wrong. Yeah. And part of being a leader is learning how to manage and think about and play with and distribute the thinking about these paradoxical challenges that you face and having your answer. But understanding that if somebody disagrees with the answer, they're just somewhere else on the curve between those two competing ideas.
Yeah. Okay. So there's no perfect answer to some of those types of problems, and it's coming up with what makes the most sense for you to do, knowing that there are other ways to tackle it, but you're never going to solve it perfectly. You've just got to get on with it.
No, exactly. But you can solve it well. And, that means being data-driven in decision makings. It means sharing the problems you're struggling with a team and taking perspectives from people. It means creating the right forums to have debate. And then it means codifying your answer, because otherwise that paradox is going to keep turning up everywhere else in the business. And if there is a path forward that the business has decided, document that and share it and make sure everyone understands how you got there.
Yeah. And in terms of other business people that you've observed over the years, are there anyone in Australia or overseas that come to mind that particularly inspires you?
Yeah, Joe DeBlock, I'm not sure how to pronounce his name, founded an organization called Zorg, which is a care agency, I think, in the Netherlands. And he bucked the trend of what was happening in the rest of healthcare, which is centralization, private equity, productizing medicine, and built arguably the flattest organization on earth. It's a huge business now, and kind of thousands, tens of thousands, even people who work for it. But it's self-organized. He creates teams of about 12, gives them complete autonomy on how they run their unit, gives them a learning budget, gives them a marketing budget, lets them run their P&L, and cut out almost all of the middle management and administration, except for things like finance, from the organization. And it's pretty radical, but it worked. There's actually insurance codes for Buurtzorg in most of the kind of insurance dex codes, because it didn't fit into any of the other nice categories that productized medicine liked. And it's been an immensely successful organization. I think his observation, it's really easy to make things hard, and it's really hard to make things easy. Also, what I took from it is something like people doing work are full of ideas that people thinking about doing work will never have, something like that. And really fostered that sense of, well, we have these people caring for our individual customers. They understand what's needed better than anyone else. They need support sometimes to implement those ideas, but we shouldn't create this separate strategy. Here I am sitting as the head of innovation and strategy, but we shouldn't necessarily create a separate function to come up with all the good ideas. They exist within the business. We need to empower them.
I have to have a look at him because I've not heard of him before, and it's a fascinating case study for sure. Anyone else that comes to mind?
Look, there's some amazing entrepreneurs. A good friend, Jen George, is an Australian founder with a number of exits, and co-founded Like-Minded Bitches Who Drink Wine, which is a great community organization. I think to do all of that and raise a family is just absolutely inspiring. As part of the work in the logistics space, spent a lot of time with franchisee drivers. So these are people who've bought a territory from a logistics company, they own it, and they run a business. That business is picking up and delivering parcels. But I would have spent close to 200-300 hours on the road with them in the van, watching how everything works. And after the first couple of hours, you get through all the technical stuff. You understand how to load a van, you understand how to deliver a parcel. And so you just talk. And, you to have met dozens and dozens of small business owners, you heard their stories, heard why they're doing what they're doing, heard the passion they have for something that I don't think many people give two thoughts to, the life of the guy delivering the parcel. I learned a lot, and I find those guys very inspiring. And I think Australia is full of small business owners who are inspiring.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's the backbone of what the country was built on, right? Was the guy just having a go.
Yeah, no, exactly right. And it's not just having a go, they're passionate. They've got ideas for how the world's going to change, and it's always nice to hear them.
Yeah, perfect. What about business books? Any particular business book that you'd recommend that stood out specifically to you?
Yeah, I mentioned The Unfinished Leader, and I'm sorry, I don't know. There's 3 authors. I can't remember their names.
We'll have a look at that.
Yeah, look, the book I would recommend everybody read is Humankind by Rutger Bregman. And it's pop. It's not, I don't know how sciencey it is, but it takes aim at a lot of the other anthrope books that speak to things like the Stanford Prison Experiment and the bystander effect, and all these kind of veneer theory comments on how humans work in large groups. And I think that view can be quite damaging to someone trying to lead an organization. I think Humankind's the antidote to that, and really questions and provides alternative perspectives on those landmark studies, and provides a much more hopeful and motivating view of human society. So Humankind would be absolutely the top of my recommendations list. I also think we've got Professor Toby Walsh in Australia, who is a mentor of mine, and he's absolutely brilliant, and the country's lucky to have him. He's just published Faking It, which looks at the future of deep fakes and how AI might impact society. His previous book, Machines Behaving Badly, is actually next to my bed. So I think if you pick up one of Toby's books, you're going to do all right.
Okay, some good recommendations there. We'll have to check them out. What about a quote or anything that you sort of live by as a philosophy or a maxim, if you like?
I don't know that I have maxim, but I did suspect you might ask me this. And so looking through things I'd written down in notebooks, I found war does not determine who is right. It only determines who is left. And that was by Bertrand Russell, who was a mathematician and philosopher in that. But I really like that. We had a tendency in the business to really overthink problems, and we would tease out a particular feature for days. I like that quote because it was a reminder that, look, maybe we'll end up being right, But if we're right after we've run out of capital or after we've lost the tender, then it doesn't matter. We need to still keep moving, and we need to be able to decide between things that are important to spend a long time thinking about and things that we can execute on, learn from, and iterate. And ideally, those reversible decisions, we need to be quicker at making them. And that was certainly something we had to adjust as a culture.
I love that quote, and it applies. I read it only a couple of days ago as well, actually, and it applies equally to business as it does to actually the conflict and war in life. I mean, that's a very true statement. What's next for you in the business?
Well, look, I'm quite excited. Despite the grey hair, I'm relatively young. I've had this amazing learning experience with my colleagues at Premonition, and I'm in a pretty exciting role. Shippit is poised to reshape big chunks of the logistics industry. What I'm particularly excited about is the tons and tons of carbon that we're working to pull out of the supply chain. And so for me, I'm doing exactly what I'd like to be doing kind of at this phase of my life, which is working on impactful projects, working on values first projects, and working with a great team. And I hope to be doing that for a long time to come.
Brad, it's been fascinating hearing your answers and going through your journey. I love the fact that you're now working alongside William within Shippit, great business and great people, and look forward to seeing what happens next in the future.
Thank you, Dion. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks, Brad.